and Rape Crisis Center, as we had Jess on a little bit ago as well. So thank you so much, and I will turn it over to you, Shanell.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, everyone. My name is Shanell Gist. I am the director of our anti-human trafficking and advocacy program here at the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center. I also follow up with our PREA calls. PREA is the Prison Rape Elimination Act, where an inmate is sexually assaulted by either another inmate or by a staff member. And I also teach various classes for cognitive thinking, social skills, teach classes about how PTSD, mental illness, substance abuse all correlates with one. I was teaching classes to the inmates at county jail, but COVID kind of put it into that, unfortunately. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. If you see me looking in different places, I have multiple screens going on over here. So just know I'm here. Let's see. Trying to get it to where I can start the. Are you guys seeing like the presenter mode?
No, right now we're still seeing the that you're.
So you just see the one screen then, like
yes.
This? Okay, yeah. Perfect.
Or
okay,
no, so sorry, we are seeing
both screens.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get to the thing to take it off, but the taskbar at the top, it has the Zoom stuff.
Okay,
I need to get to the one under it.
Yeah, so we are seeing a very fancy presenter screen.
Okay.
So I think that'll work though.
Okay, well, I'll just go with it then.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, I'm Shanell Gist, Human Trafficking Identification, Awareness, and Recovery. Our objectives here today is to introduce the role CRCC plays in assisting survivors of human trafficking, identifying legal definitions of human trafficking as well as labor trafficking, analyzing the ends means process model, identifying elements of commercial sexual exploitation of children, examining risk factors, identifying the indicators of juvenile human trafficking, evaluating traffickers and consumers, identifying intersection between human trafficking as well as substance abuse, and then examining trauma and its effects of trafficking. A little self-care before I get started. Human trafficking and labor trafficking can be a very difficult topic to discuss as well as get educated on. So if this is triggering for you, feel free to do what you need to do for your self-care. If you need to step away, turn your camera off, again, do what you need to do. Pronouns, mine are she, her, and hers. Human trafficking is not gender specific, but I do want to let you know that in Ohio, most of our victims here are female that are identified that have come forward. And in this presentation, the words survivors, victims, and clients will be used interchangeably. So I'm sure you probably
Shanell, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt one more time. It hopped back to the regular PowerPoint.
So are you seeing one slide? Or two?
So we're seeing before it gets to the presentation.
Okay, let me stop sharing. My screen shows something completely different.
Okay, and I will.
Let me take this off. Maybe this will work better. Can everybody see it now?
Perfect.
Okay. Okay, so our vision here at CRCC is elimination of sexual violence, and our mission is to support the survivors of rape and sexual abuse while promoting healing and prevention and also creating social change. So a little bit about our programs. We have our 24-hour crisis hotline. You can call that, text, chat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Trauma counseling, we offer individual counseling, group therapy. We're dabbling a little bit more into the art therapy, the yoga therapy, victim advocacy assistance. Those are a group of individuals who are there for the the criminal justice aspect of a survivor's story going forward. So if a survivor wants to make that initial police report, go to the detective meetings, those prosecutor meetings, following up, going to court, making sure the survivor's voice is being heard throughout the criminal proceedings, while also just making sure their rights aren't being violated in the state of Ohio as being a victim. Our 24-hour crisis hotline workers, they are diligent with responding to hospital calls, where if somebody comes through the ER that needs a SANE exam done, or also known as a rape kit, they will attend that meeting and give them the resources that they need. We have a prevention and outreach team, a group of individuals who work specifically with our community partners to build those relationships on awareness and just bring in more traffic to our agency, as well as help their programs as well. Case management team is a team of people who focus on anything that our survivors may need, such as referrals. If they need housing, an ID, passport, they need to find where they can get a hot meal, they need to fill out applications to different programs that they may be interested in or may need to utilize. That team deals with that. Our SACI team, which is our Sexual Assault Initiative Kit, that team focuses on the backlog in Cuyahoga County that was discovered a few years ago. There were hundreds of untested rape kits that are now going forward. They're being tested. And we have a group of advocates who focus on responding to those survivors whose kits are now being tested. They respond to them and let them know that it's being tested. Some of those conversations are going like because some of them are still within the statute of limitations, which is 25 years, but some of them aren't. So sometimes those calls are unfortunately to say, we found your rape kit is being tested, but unfortunately we can't go forward with it due to the statute of limitations. But then some of those are calls are, hey, this case is about to go forward, can we meet? Our STAR team is our sex trafficking advocacy and recovery team, which focuses on the recovery and awareness of sex trafficking as well as labor trafficking. We work very closely with the task force to assist them with the recovery of survivors of trafficking. About 2 weeks ago, we were involved in the Ohio-wide sting that took place. It was in Brooklyn, Lake County, as well as Elyria, excuse me. And we were a part of that, so we were responding to them. The task force created fake ads where young women were responding, as well as consumers were showing up to pay for sex. So those guys were arrested, and we just spoke with the ladies about getting out of the lifestyle, what that looks like, and just provided them with services that they may want to engage in. A little bit more about the STAR team. Again, we do the victim assistance. We link them to counseling. We personally train law enforcement officers as well as medical professionals about the awareness of trafficking, the response, what to do, what not to do, what to say, what not to say. We do human trafficking assessments where a juvenile can, if they're identified in any way as being trafficked, and that could be by a teacher, a doctor, a medical professional, law enforcement, if they go into juvie and with charges such as solicitation, prostitution, loitering, things like that, or even theft, drug trafficking, if they say anything during that initial intake that leads that person to believe that there could be some trafficking going on with the individual, they will contact us and we will meet them wherever they're at to do a face-to-face assessment with them and try to refer them to what is called a safe harbor docket. And the assessment consists of questions that based on what's your family life like? Have you ever used or abused substances? Do you have any mental illness going on? What is your relationship like with your siblings? Have you ever been sexually assaulted? Do you know what trafficking is? Do you believe you've been trafficking? And we put all of that in a report and submit that to the judge based on if we recommend them for the safe harbor docket. If they are approved for the safe harbor docket, instead of being criminalized for their crimes and having to go through the whole court process, they'll receive resources instead, such as the classes, the counseling, the things that they really need versus sitting inside juvie. The Trafficking Victim Assistance Program, also known as the TVAP, that is a program for individuals who are not legally here but still would like to get help due to them being trafficked. At the Clean Rate Crisis Center, we don't even ask about citizenship. We don't care. We'll work with whoever. But as far as getting the law enforcement involved, sometimes that does play a part as far as if they are legally in the U.S. So we do work with them to set them up with a team of lawyers who will work with them to get a temporary visa. A little bit about our STAR hotline. So people can call the Starlets hotline. We get most calls from the task force, again, from the same nurses. And honestly, survivors themselves can call that line to talk to them, to talk to an advocate on the hotline about what's going on, or if somebody needs to show up to the hospital for a SANE exam, or the task force needs an advocate there for an interview. And the CIS worker, which is our hotline workers, they will get that information. They will respond. They'll first meet with the SANE nurse, the task force, the detectives, other professionals that are there, and then they'll go talk to the survivor to see how they're feeling, see if they would like an advocate to stay there throughout the SANE exam. Sometimes survivors want the advocate in the room, sometimes not so much, but it's really up to the survivor. And the CIS worker always supports the survivor throughout their decision making. They give them the pros and cons of everything as far as reporting. They talk to them about getting the STD medicines, the HIV medicines, talk to them about actually following up with the HIV test every 3 months for the next few years. So they really hone in on what could happen, what couldn't happen, the pros and cons of everything. And they always bring a bag of clothes and toiletries to the hospital and make sure that they have a safe place to stay that night. If they don't, they work with the other hotline workers to find them a good place to stay for the night. And then when they're done with that, they submit all that information to our electronic system for reporting. And then I respond to those and assign them to advocates to respond within the next 24 to 48 hours. So we attend weekly MDT meetings for juveniles, and then for adults, there's an adult trafficking MDT with the task force. And that is once a month on the second Friday of every month. What that is a team of attorneys, law enforcement officers, CAC staff, DCFS staff, mental health professionals, medical professionals. There's a victim advocate as well as a manager on the call. And we literally go down the list of every single survivor that we all serve together. And it's a multidisciplinary team meeting. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with those, working in the field. So we're discussing what's going on, what's not going on, who needs to do what, who can do better, who's doing too much, making sure we're not providing double services. Just a meeting to make sure everybody's on the same page with survivors. The task force that we work with is made up of detectives from Orange Village, the Sheriff's Department, Homeland Security, Metro Police, as well as Brooklyn Police. They basically developed a task force because the need of the human trafficking became too high for just regular detectives to take care of it, because they obviously have other jobs to do as well. But they did ask a lot of different police departments around this area to join. And right now we just have Orange Village, Metro Police, and Brooklyn. And there's a couple of Cleveland police officers. They respond to hotels things like I just talked about. We did a week ago, we did the NFL draft. Last year in November, we did a sting in Tremont. They respond to houses, they respond to missing persons reports, they receive tips. They are actively on social media platforms, so they have the Facebook, IG, Twitter, TikTok, they all have fake profiles, and they're searching for missing children. So now I have a little pop quiz. You can feel free to use the chat. I do have 3 questions. So victims of trafficking can be women or men, girls or boys. So in the chat, do you guys think that is true or is that false? Victims of trafficking can be women or men, girls or boys. Okay, I'm getting all truths. The next question is, trafficking does not occur in the suburbs. Do you guys think that is true or is that false? Okay, I'm getting all falses. A child can be a prostitute. Is that true or is that false? Okay. Getting a little mixed responses, get truths and falses, and I will be honest, that pretty much happens every time I do this training. Get a mixed response. So we're going to go over those answers throughout the presentation. So what is human trafficking? Again, in the chat, tell me what comes to your mind when you think of trafficking. Human trafficking, what comes to mind? Selling, sexual abuse. Someone sold for sex, abuse, sex, domestic abuse, individuals not having an option, the movie Taken, exploitation and rape, staying hidden, sexual coercion. Those are excellent answers. Thanks, everyone. So the legal definition of human trafficking, the Ohio Revised Code 2905.32 defines trafficking as no person shall knowingly recruit, lure, entice, isolate, harbor, provide, transport, obtain, or maintain another person knowing that the person will be subjected to involuntary servitude or be compelled to engage in sexual activity for hire. So there are some federal laws associated with human trafficking, sex trafficking, and labor trafficking specifically that are worded a little differently, and I did want to point those out to you. So the federal law of sex trafficking states that it is recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person for the purposes of a commercial sex act in which the commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such an act has not attained 18 years of age. Labor trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purposes of subjecting to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. Debt bondage is when you will never be able to pay your debt off and the person just keeps making you do more and more things. That is what debt bondage is. So keep in mind, sex trafficking is all about commercial sexual act that is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, and labor trafficking is the trafficking of someone for labor or services that is done by force, fraud, or coercion. So like you saw, those definitions were a little different. They were worded a little different, but I do want to point out that in April of 2021, we no longer follow Ohio's tier definition. So if anyone under the age of 18 comes forward and saying that they're a victim of human trafficking, it will automatically be a federal case that is involved because our federal law of human trafficking now trumps our Ohio law. Our federal law, to put in short, is any child under the age of 18 that is engaging in commercial sexual activity is a victim of human trafficking. So again, anyone under 18 that is being trafficked is a victim of human trafficking, and it does not have to be proven or anything. So Ohio had a tier definition of trafficking, and this was prior to April of this year, and it relates to the age of consent in the state of Ohio, which is 16. So let's go back to that third question on the quiz that everyone said true, and then some people said false. Can a child be a prostitute? So the legal age of consent to have sex in the state of Ohio is 16. So legally, a child cannot be a prostitute. So if you answered false on that, you were correct. A child cannot be a prostitute, and that is due to the legal age of consent being 16 in the state of Ohio. So it's one thing for a child to wake up and say, hey, I need some money. What can I do? Oh, I'm going to go sell myself for some money. That's what they're saying in their mind. But in the state of Ohio, legally, they're being raped. They're being sexually assaulted. So keep that in mind. Any child that is engaging in sexual activity under the age of 16 is being sexually assaulted. And also federal law moving forward, any child under the age of 18 is involved in commercial sexual activity is a victim of trafficking. But I do want to tell you about what the tier definition of trafficking was prior to April of this year. So if you were under the age of 16, law enforcement did not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. If you were a disabled minor, law enforcement did not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. If you were age 16 and 17 and you were stating that your trafficker was a person with a position of authority over you, maybe they were a coach, band director, parent, a teacher, therapist, pastor, rabbi, any of those that had authority over the individual, they did not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. But unfortunately, if an individual was 16 or 17 and didn't fit into any of those other categories, law enforcement did have to prove force, fraud, or coercion due to the legal age of consent being 16 in the state of Ohio. But again, I'll say it again, anyone under the age of 18, if they are involved in commercial sexual activity and they are under the age of 18, it now states that they are being trafficked, and that is a federal law. So moving along, a couple of categories. So sex trafficking is more of your prostitution, porn, stripping, lap dances, live sex shows, mail order brides, child brides. I do want to point out the mail order brides, child brides, that's not something we typically would see in the US anymore. In other countries, that is very familiar still due to the laws. In other countries, a 12-year-old legally can be married. It wasn't until, I don't want to say recently, but it really wasn't that long ago, because I've had presentations and talked about this where people were saying, oh, my grandmother was a mail order bride, and they were my age, not grandma, but the person on the training. So just keep in mind, there are people still in the US right now that literally were mail order brides, child brides, but the laws have changed to where legally in the US you can't get married as a child, but keep in mind in other countries that still stands. Labor trafficking is your domestic service, sweatshops, factories, begging, agricultural work, construction, mining, brick kilns, and forced military service. And we'll get into a little bit more about labor trafficking later throughout the presentation. So I do want to point out that human trafficking is the world's second largest criminal enterprise behind narcotics. Narcotics, of course, is number one. The drug trafficking, the laws for drug trafficking are pretty high. The RICO law, everyone can go down versus human trafficking. It's kind of a low risk, high reward. You don't get in as much trouble. It takes, like how we just went over the laws, it kind of took up until now, it took a long time to even prove that trafficking was taking place versus survivors even wanting to come forward to state they were being trafficked. And with narcotics, people can manufacture narcotics literally at their house and sell them over and over and over. And then a person you can sell over and over and over. You can change their makeup, their nails, their hair, the clothes, and just sell them over and over and over. So some fun facts: an estimated 88% of trafficked individuals access medical care while being trafficked. So what that means is 88% of survivors that are being trafficked during their time of being trafficked, they stepped foot in a medical care office at one point. That could have been an ER, triage nurse, that could have been an abortion clinic, Planned Parenthood, places like that. That could have been a dentist office just for dental work. Anywhere where medical care professional providers work, 88% of trafficking individuals have stepped foot in there while they're being trafficked. And that number is way too high for our liking. But what that states is either their characteristics weren't strong enough as someone being trafficked that the medical professional were picked up on it, or maybe the medical professional, they just aren't aware of the characteristics of someone being trafficked, or we've even seen maybe they didn't have any characteristics. Maybe they went in there and presented like nothing was wrong, like a normal individual that was in a safe situation. So there was no red flags or anything. So that's why we work diligently at CRCT to train our employees about responding to trafficking awareness, as well as our medical care professionals, about what that looks like, what are the characteristics, how do individuals present, and who to contact if you feel that one of your patients in your office is being trafficked. An estimated 83% of identified sex trafficking victims are U.S. citizens. An estimated 67% of identified labor trafficking victims are undocumented individuals. And the estimated average age into trafficking for victims is 12 to 14 years old. And me personally, the youngest victim I've seen at CRCC for trafficking was 9 years old. California and Washington, D.C. have the highest reported human trafficking in the United States. 18% of Ohio victims said that they became involved in sex trade before the age of 18, and 10% said they became involved before the age of 12. So those numbers are, the ages are getting lower and lower as far as like who's getting involved in trafficking, which we, of course, we do not like to see. Ohio has ranked as high as 5th among all states in the total reported human trafficking cases, with Toledo being identified as the 4th highest ranking city. So again, I want to point out Ohio is number 5, and the city Toledo is number 4 as the highest ranking in the nation. I know those numbers sound kind of high, but we actually love that those numbers are so high, because what that lets us know that people here are reporting that they're being trafficked. They know where to go. They know what's happening. There's awareness in the cities. There's awareness in the state, the different communities, that trafficking is happening there. And there are resources being set up as far as reporting and the follow-up care. If you go to any state, cities, towns, anything that's saying, oh, trafficking doesn't happen here, we don't have any human trafficking reports, just know that that's not accurate. Trafficking happens everywhere. That may be true about them not having any reports, because people really don't know how to report. And honestly, it also comes down to a lot of people don't know they're being trafficked. A lot of people think they're just in a loving situation where they're with their boyfriend or their family member. They don't know that they're being taken advantage of, being coerced and manipulated. So they don't even go to the police about trafficking. So again, keep in mind that if the numbers are pretty high, that means that's good, that there's a reporting going on, there's awareness within the community, versus going to a community that says it does not happen here, because it happens everywhere. So underage girls are the bulk of victims, including porn, stripping, escort services, and prostitution. 60% of children exploited in prostitution are first recruited by their peers. So that's somebody that they love, they trusted, that was supposed to be watching over them, or it could have been a friend that they were supposed to just be hanging out, doing friend-kid stuff, not going into exploitation and prostitution. And the overwhelming majority of runaways, homeless, abused, and at-risk children are approached by pimps and drug dealers within 48 hours of landing on the streets. So what we have noticed a lot at CRCC is individuals who leave their home Within those first 48 hours, they are propositioned by a pimp. And I'm not saying that a pimp is just pulling up to them saying, hey, get in my car, you're trying to make some money, go do what I need you to do. It's more along the lines of, hey, I see you walking down the street. Where are you going? You want something to eat? Can I get your nails done? You have somewhere to stay tonight? That's what we're seeing of. And then that turns into trafficking, unfortunately. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how trafficking even comes about through the use of force, fraud, and coercion. So the definition of force is the use of a weapon. That could be any type of weapon. That doesn't necessarily mean a gun or a knife. That could be anything you pick up next to you that could severely hurt the next person. So it could be the use of such physical strength or violence, and that is sufficient to overcome, restrain, or injure a person. Or it could be inflicting physical harm sufficient to coerce or compel submission by that victim. Fraud is more of a deceitful practice, willful device, the intent to deprive someone of their rights or in some manner do them an injury. So in the context of human trafficking for fraud, it often involves false promises of jobs or other opportunities. So individuals who are responding to ads thinking that they're going to a job, things like that is all fraud. Coercion is done by the threat or serious harm to or physical restraint against any person. So that could be any scheme, a plan, or a pattern intended to cause a person to believe that the failure to perform that act would result in a serious harm or physical restraint against that person. And it's also the abuse or threatened abuse of the legal system. So we've had clients that have come to us who stated that their trafficker said that if you don't do this or that, I'll tell the police you're a prostitute. I'll call ICE on you. So things like that are coercion, doing whatever, saying whatever to get that person to do what you need them to do. We're going to talk a little bit about the ends means process model that equals human trafficking. So for the ends means process model, you need one of these basically from each category in order to equal to human trafficking. So to break it down a little bit more, the ends are what are the services the survivor was made to perform? And that was done through involuntary servitude, debt bondage, and sex trafficking. The means, what did the perpetrator do to ensure that the survivor provided the services? And that what mechanisms did the perpetrator use to control their survivor? They did that through force, fraud, and coercion, which we just talked about. The process is what were the intentional acts that the perpetrator took to get the survivor in the situation. And so it's like, what methods did the perpetrator use to the survivor in that situation? And that was done through recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, and obtaining. So with force, fraud, and coercion as it relates to the EMP model, force, again, is your physical assault, sexual assault, confinement, fraud, and act of deception with criminal intent, and coercion is a threat of serious harm against any person or the use or threatened abuse of the legal system. So I do have a case study activity for everyone. So I'm going to read it and then ask a few questions. So Jamil is 14 years old and lives with his mother in an apartment. Even though she works 2 jobs, his mother struggles to make ends meet. Jamil spends a lot of time home alone, and the landlord often asks Jamil to help him with some projects around the building to keep him busy. So for the last 3 months, while they are hanging out, the landlord makes Jamil perform oral sex and sometimes takes pictures of him during those sexual acts. The landlord told Jamil and his mother that he would not evict them as long as Jamil keeps hanging out with him. In this scenario, if sex trafficking is occurring, who would be identified as the trafficker? So my first question is trafficking occurring in this case study? Okay, I'm getting some yeses. So who is being trafficked in this situation? Okay, I'm getting some Jamils. And who is the trafficker in this situation? Okay, I'm getting the landlord. Okay, good job, everyone. So now we're going to talk a little bit about CSEC, which is the commercial sexual exploitation of children. And that involves sexual exploitation of minors for economic profit. It includes any sex act on account of which anything of value is given to or received by any person. And that could be, again, trafficking for sexual purposes, sex tourism, which is taking an individual from state to traffic them, mail order bride trade, and early marriage. Again, that's not something we see too often in the U.S. anymore, but I'm not saying that people who were married through early marriage and mail order brides, they are still here living. Pornography, stripping, performing in sexual venues such as peep shows or clubs. Well, let's speak a little bit about risk factors. Who is at risk for being trafficked? Who are those vulnerable individuals? They are the troubled youth, insufficient affection at home, looking to belong. Maybe they are going through poverty. So those individuals who aren't necessarily receiving that love, attention, affection at home, so they are going to the streets to look for that love, attention, and affection. And most of the time that leads them to being involved with negative people, places, and things. The relationship factors of it is family conflict or dysfunction, or if there's a history of drug or substance abuse, or individuals who fall easily to peer pressure is what we see a lot of. Again, that trying to fit in, trying to just do what people say just to seem cool. Previous engagement in the juvenile justice system, as well as history of sexual exploitation. Some more communities that are at risk are individuals who identify with the LGBTQ plus community, transgender or gender non-conforming community. That's pretty self-explanatory. They come out to their peers, their friends, their families. They might not be that accepting of that. So again, they look to the streets for that love, attention, and affection. And sometimes they look to their own people in their own community for that love, attention, and affection. And most of the time, there are perpetrators within their own community that are looking for vulnerable individuals who know that they just came out to their friends or family, they didn't receive that they love, that they needed. So they take advantage of them in that vulnerable situation while they're already feeling pretty down. Again, missing youth, history of exploitation in the community or family, and homelessness. Past or possible past or current charges that we've seen with juvie: prostitution, solicitation, loitering to engage in solicitation, theft, disorderly conduct, status offenses, drug offenses. We talked about safe harbor docket. These are the offenses that we see the most often that get referred to the safe harbor docket for an HTVA assessment. And I've done jail groups probably for about 8 years. Well, I'll say 7 because of COVID. So it's about 7 years now I was doing jail groups, and about 90% of inmates that are incarcerated, it really stems down to childhood trauma that never really got addressed. A lot of people were trafficked as children, sexually abused, and that's male and female, or other types of traumatic events they experienced that instead of their families like really getting the help they believe, most of the time mom didn't believe them. Maybe dad was the perpetrator in and out of the household. So that led them to not really gaining positive coping mechanisms, which led them to doing negative things, negative people, negative places, negative things, which led them to committing crimes most of the time just to survive, just to have a place to sleep, to a place, something to eat for the night, clothes on their back. So that is what we're seeing a lot of, is adults who didn't really receive that care, that love that they needed as a child, who eventually end up committing crimes. So that's why we work diligently with our children to help them out of the lifestyle and give them those resources while they're in. So some indicators for trafficking: not free to come and go. And if anybody you see that's providing sexual acts that's under the age of 18, individuals that owe large money, large debts, and they're not able to pay it off, or they're recruited through the false promises regarding nature or work conditions. So that's like they're responding to the ads of, hey, I need somebody to clean my house. I need somebody to come work in my garden today or my field, stuff like that. Forced to meet daily quotas, maybe they're not paid directly, or they're unable to speak freely or in a scripted tone. So when you ask them questions, they don't really respond. They look up to the next person that's in charge of them or the boss, and they typically would respond. Anyone that appears to have a lost sense of time, maybe they're protecting the person harming them, or maybe they lack acknowledgement of whereabouts, or they don't know what city they're in, they don't know what day it is, what time it is. They're living on site, working on site. They're not allowed to take breaks. They suffer from unusual restrictions at work. Maybe you even see signs of scars, trauma, injury, fatigue, poor hygiene, or they may even have another person's name tattooed or name on their body, either their name or nickname. We've seen branding tattoos: Daddy's Girl, Daddy's Bitch, Mike Angel. So things like that are all indicators that some trafficking could be occurring. So to break it down a little bit better, juvenile trafficking red flags for health could be chronic dental issues, substance abuse, multiple pregnancies that either end in miscarriage, terminations, or have going full-term STIs, STDs, signs of extreme fatigue, exhaustion, malnourishment, frequent bladder infections, yeast infections, basically any undiagnosed, untreated illnesses, all of a sudden unexplained bruises, illnesses, injuries, people aren't really able to explain. For appearance, juveniles that are inappropriately dressed for the weather, location, age. If it's a snowstorm and you're in your car with the heat turned all the way up and then you see a child walking down the street by himself with shorts on and sandals, that's a problem. Branding tattoos, how we talked about the daddy's girl, daddy's bitch, things like that are definitely indicators that trafficking is most likely is occurring. The expensive gifts, if you see a child who typically maybe not have a lot of money, their mom or dad don't really dress them in certain type of ways, but then all of a sudden they have all the new hairstyles, nails, clothes, electronics, the shoes, the gifts. That's a conversation. Hey, where are you getting all this money from? Hey, does your mom have a new job? Like, what's going on? Juveniles with large amounts of cash, prepaid credit cards, hotel keys, multiple cell phones. It's one thing to go out of town with your family. You keep the hotel key as a souvenir. I'm sure we've all done it. But it's another thing for a juvenile to be walking around with a pocket full of hotel keys, cell phones, credit cards. That's just not appropriate. Nonverbal communication with an adult. An example could be if if a juvenile has gone to a medical care facility, maybe they're being triaged or maybe just a regular doctor's appointment, and the doctor is asking those basic questions like, oh, how are you? How old are you now? How's school going? What brings you here today? If they're not able to answer those questions and they're like, keep looking up at the mom or guardian, whoever brought their, I'm not saying trafficking is occurring, but that is a red flag that trafficking could be occurring. The presence of an overly controlling or concerned older male or female. So example, that could be instead of maybe the kid wants to answer in the doctor's office, but they're the ones that are cutting the kid off, saying, oh, well, she's 6. Oh, she goes to this school. She's fine. She ate yesterday. She did this, that. And then the kid is kind of looking like, but I wanted to talk. So situations like that could be trafficking red flags. Some social, emotional, and behavioral signs of trauma, usually paranoid, fearful, maybe significant changes in behavior. Maybe they're always numb, depressed, present with low self-esteem. Maybe they're sad, kind of quiet, but then all of a sudden they're angry, defiant, belligerent, defensive. Situations like that could be significant changes in behavior. Hanging around older women, when older men and women, increasingly truant or absent from school. And what we're also seeing now is gang affiliation. So some family, home, and placement red flags, multiple placements with minimal social support. Some examples of that could be if a child goes from foster care to foster care to foster care, or maybe mom doesn't have a stable place to live, so they're going from shelter to shelter, or maybe they're going from friend's house to friend's house. They're not building those minimal supports, so that leads them to being vulnerable to being trafficked. Homelessness, disconnected from family, guardianship by unrelated adult, family history of prostitution or solicitation, history of physical, sexual abuse, fear of not following the rules or the consequences of not following the rules, living and traveling frequently through hotels. So I do want to let you know that even if someone displays all the risk factors, that does not mean that their life will end in trafficking. And that has a lot to do with resiliency and them receiving the attention they need after they're recovered out of the lifestyle of trafficking, or after they present with those risky behaviors, or if they're in a risky environment. If they really receive the love, the attention, the care that they need, there's a possibility that they won't end up in a vulnerable population. And that kind of example of that would be how a brother and sister can grow up in the same household. One could be very successful, and then one could be maybe addicted to drugs and not as successful, but maybe they grew up together, but they viewed things differently. Is basically determines how if somebody could end up in a lifestyle of trafficking. So now we're going to talk a little bit about labor trafficking, which is a form of modern day slavery in which individuals perform labor or services through the use of force, fraud, and coercion. Labor trafficking includes situations of debt bondage, which is work exchanged for a debt, forced labor, and involuntary child labor. So just like human trafficking, labor traffickers use force, fraud, and coercion. The most vulnerable population that can be subject to labor trafficking is migrant workers, and that's documented and undocumented. And the reason why we say that is because they are kind of responding to those ads to work under the table. So unfortunately, that leaves them in situations where they're not being paid correctly, they're not being treated correctly. So that is basically exactly what labor trafficking is. And anyone can fall victim to labor trafficking. So there are elements of labor trafficking. Agricultural is you're working in the fields, managing the crops, being in the sun all day. Domestic servitude is working in the salons, working in the restaurants. Street economy is your drug trafficking. Gang activity, peddling has more to do with selling on the street, making things, trying to sell them, or stealing things, trying to sell them, and just simply begging. So with labor trafficking, we see scars, headaches, hearing loss, cardiovascular, respiratory problems, limb amputation as a result of physical abuse. They may develop chronic back, visual, and respiratory problems from working in agricultural, such as construction or manufacturing under dangerous conditions. And the individuals are often malnourished and they may never reach their full height. And they also could have poorly formed or rotting teeth and later experience reproductive issues. Again, some more industries where labor trafficking occurs: nail salons, restaurants, nannies, maids, housekeepers, landscaping, construction, sales crew, agricultural, drug activity, drug trafficking and gang activity. So now we're going to talk a little bit about who are the traffickers and who are the consumers. So, and here is a quote with the young girls: "You promise them to heaven, they'll follow you to hell," which was made by a convicted sex trafficker. So traffickers can be in our every gender, age, race, and socioeconomic class. Trafficking can be one person exploiting another, such as a boyfriend exploiting his girlfriend. And trafficking can be a more structured hierarchical organization, such as a prostitution ring or a sweatshop. I did have a video for you guys to watch, but due to the time, I'm going to skip over that. And I believe you probably will receive the PowerPoint. So you can probably watch that on your own time, because it is 8 minutes long, but I don't want to take up 8 minutes. So we're going to talk a little bit about the types of pimps that we see. So a guerrilla pimp is the type of individual who will use force, such as kidnapping, violence, drugs, blackmail to overpower their prey. So they target their prey. So that could be teens at party, the mall, social media, anywhere lacking responsible adult supervision. They're the type of individuals that are saying things like, "Hey, come party with me. Don't tell anyone where you're going. If you don't do what I say, I'll post these naked pictures of you on the internet." So who to watch out for is men that are 18 over who want to hang with younger women or girls, or overly friendly girls who are recruiters themselves, who persistently invite others or teens to party and to drink or drug with them. So the romance pimp, he's kind of the complete opposite from the guerrilla pimp. So the romance pimp, they don't have to kidnap, they don't have to use violence, they don't have to use drugs, because what they use is their mouthpiece. They use the charms, the gifts, the flattery. They romance their prey. They're the ones that have their victims thinking that they love them, that they're in a relationship. So they're looking for girls, so girls who are looking for love, acceptance, runaways, sweet and naive young women and men. So they're the ones that if somebody young posts on their Instagram or Facebook, "I hate my mom, I'm never coming back," they're the ones in their DM saying, "I don't like my mom either. You want to talk about it? Well, if you don't want to go to your mom's house tonight, I have a couch for you to sleep on." So situations like that, they're the ones saying, "I love you. Nobody understands me. I'll give you everything you deserve. I can't live without you." So they're using their mouthpiece to manipulate those victims. So what to watch out for: guys who fall in love too quickly, girls or guys or recruiters who encourage teens to run away from home, promising a happier life. And what we're seeing now also is the CEO pimp. So they're the type of individual who uses money and business strategies to swindle prey. This is only an opinion, but I do believe that R. Kelly was a CEO pimp, if we want to categorize him. He was the one who was going after aspiring models, entertainers, especially naive young women. He was the one saying, "Hey, I'll make you famous. I'll just do this for me. I'll make sure you become famous singer or celebrity, whatever." They're the type of individual saying, "Hey, I'm an agent. You have what it takes to make it in the industry. Just trust me. This is strictly business. I can make you rich." And then they have them fill out a form with all their information, and then they have all their information that they then go use against them. So what to watch out for: men who flash cash and promise stardom, agents who are too pushy, agents who want bikini or artistically nude photos. So those are CEO pimps. And again, me stating R. Kelly is one is only my opinion. So, and also what we see that's not listed on here is gang pimps. So what we're seeing more of. So those are the type of individuals who, so back in the day, if you wanted to join a gang, you had to be physically initiated into that gang, meaning every single person that in that gang, they pretty much beat you up. So you were almost dead, almost basically. But now, so women who want to join gangs, if their boyfriend is already in the gang, most of the time they have to sleep with every single gang member in the gang, and then they can consider themselves a member, and that is definitely trafficking, and that's what we would call a gang pimp. So a little bit, this is public perception. Back in the day, this is what pimps used to look like. They had the pimp balls, the fur coats, the hats, the all the jewelry, glasses, all that good stuff. That is the perception. However, that is not reality. This is reality. This guy on the left Richard Purnell. He was in Garfield Heights. He opened a facility for young women, for specifically for children. They were able to go and work out. There was a boxing facility there. They basically were there to let their steam go, work out their trauma while working out with somebody that was supposed to be helping young women throughout whatever they were going through. He was the romance pimp. He was the one who got the young women to believe that he was their boyfriend. I love you. And unfortunately, he ended up trafficking them. His youngest victim was 13. The guy on the right side, he was charged federally because he was a consumer of trafficking. He was responding to ads on Backpage.com, and he ended up raping one of the victims that he responded to in the ad. So this is the reality of what we see. The guy on the left and the guy on the right, these are people you would see every day, maybe on the weekend when you're at Walmart doing your weekly shopping, maybe you're at the mall with your friends, out to movies with your partner. These are the type of people that you would see every single day that you would never even say like, oh, that's somebody that's being trafficked, or that's someone that's a consumer of trafficking, or that's a pimp. So the consumers are 14% of men in the U.S. reported paying for sex. So peer pressure was a primary reason they first bought sex. On average, they first bought sex at 21 years old, and significantly more sex buyers than non-sex buyers have visited a strip club. And Johns are more likely to be educated, married, and employed. And Johns is a word that we also use for consumers. So what we see the most at the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center is 14% of U.S. citizens that are educated, employed, white, married men who fall easily to peer pressure. And again, that is what we see the most. Everything that I've done, when we look at all the pictures at the end, most of the time they are educated and employed men. I can't tell if they're married via the picture, but you can tell that because most of them even respond to the hotels, like they're going to meet the children or whoever they're going to pay for sex. They're going in their work clothes. They're going in their suits, their ties, and all of that. The sting we had last week, the councilman of Elyria, he was one of the guys who was paying for sex, well, attempting to pay for sex. He was the councilman, and he's also a youth choir director at a church out there in Elyria. So those are the types of individuals who are consumers of sex trafficking. This chart shows that 14% of U.S. men have used prostitutes, and 46%, so less than half of men that pay for sex, were taught about respecting women in sex ed classes compared to 70% of non-sex buyers. So what that means is the individuals who are educated in school, that were taught to respect women, that they know about sexual health and everything, they're not the ones that are going to be consumers of sex trafficking. It's more so of the men who didn't pay attention in class, maybe didn't have mom and sisters in the household. All they knew was disrespecting women. Maybe they watched dad disrespect mom their whole life growing up. So that's kind of a little comparison. Where are people trafficked? Travel is not necessarily a component of trafficking, but it does occur sometimes. Victims are sometimes trafficked in their own neighborhoods. They're frequently trafficked from local hotel rooms. Victims are often recruited and sold online. I see my time has come to an end, but I do want to leave you with one last fact before I hop off. And that's about, what we see the most is, I want you guys to know that people are trafficked by people that they love already. People that they love, that they trusted, that they know. We see people trafficked by mom, dads, grandma, grandpas, aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters, versus the white van myth. And I seen in the comments somebody said taken. So I do want to point that out, that that's kind of a myth here in the U.S. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. I'm not saying that a white van won't pull up on somebody on the side of the road, kidnap them, drug them up, and sell them into sex trafficking, because it does happen. It's just not as frequently as it happens in other countries. That's kind of an other country thing. Here, people are trafficked by people they already know, that they love, that they trusted. They were placed in a vulnerable situation. That person had power over them. They were supposed to protect them, to watch out for them. And unfortunately, they did not do that, which led them into being trafficked. So that's what I wanted to leave you with. And again, there is more to this presentation, but I am out of time, so you will receive that in the email.
And thank you so much, Shanell. Yeah, if there's any questions, go ahead and put those in chat as well.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so I have a question. Does sex trafficking, advocacy, and work often overlap with adult sex workers who choose to participate? So I want to say yes and no. The reason why I say yes is because even though we're like in this thing, we're looking for individuals who are trafficked. We're trying to prosecute the traffickers, their pimps. But we do come across individuals who are not being trafficked. They have chosen to be a sex worker, which we fully support. If that's what they want to do, we just still give them the resources. Like, hey, if you need a safe place to go, because we know that some people say they're a sex worker, but we also know that there's a lot that goes into sex work. It's not just like a 9 to 5. It's still having to find consumers. It's still, you may be on drugs, addicted to drugs, in and out of the lifestyle. It could be you still don't have a safe place to live and going from house to house. Versus trafficking. Trafficking is more of when someone is actually forcing you. Prostitution is kind of when you wake up and decide, hey, I'm going to sell myself for some money today, versus someone saying, hey, you better go sell yourself or I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to tell the police on you. So trafficking is more of the force, fraud, and coercion versus the sex work where an individual wants to do that. And the only reason I say they kind of intersect with CRCC is sometimes we do get sex workers who chose to do that in our trafficking stings, and we just let them know they're free to go. We just want to know, are they being trafficked? Okay, and I'll put my email in the chat. So if you guys have any follow-up questions later, anything comes to mind, feel free to contact me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shanell.
All right, thank you guys.